Donald Trump's closest advisors urged him not to declare victory on election night in 2020. He rebuffed them and instead listened to what has been described as a drunk Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani told Trump to declare victory even though millions and millions of votes had not been counted. From that night forward, Trump has never stopped telling the big lie. Trump's former Attorney General Bill Barr calls the lie bullshit. And pundits, including Republicans, have laid out what looks like a perfect case for criminal prosecution against Donald Trump. The details of election night and the 2 years that have followed are being televised before millions and millions of Americans. This explosive testimony that's being presented by the January 6th insurrection hearing is having some impact. Now, the question is, what impact is it having on the midterm elections, on the possibility of an indictment of a former president of the United States, and on the minds of American people? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live, Los Angeles. This is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
More than 22 million viewers turned in last Thursday to watch the first January 6th Insurrection Committee hearings, in which the mostly Democratic committee revealed new footage of the January 6th insurrection and presented evidence that the insurrection was a well thought out and meticulously planned effort to overturn the legitimate election of Joe Biden as president. Never revealed deposition footage from Ivanka Trump, Bill Barr, and in-person testimony, actually, from a Capitol police officer kept viewers glued to the hearings as new facts and evidence were laid out to the American public. Monday's hearings opened with a vivid portrait of election night at the White House, describing the reaction from the president when Fox News called Arizona for Biden. More testimony was shown on Monday from Bill Barr and other Trump loyalists who revealed that Trump was detached from reality after the election, that there were actually two groups that surrounded Donald Trump, what has been called Team Normal versus Rudy's team, who again, senior campaign advisor Jason Miller confirmed to be drunk that night. Yes, inebriated as he was advising the president of the United States. And we also learned that millions and millions of dollars were sent to a non-existent election defense fund as Trump raised $250 million selling the big lie to his supporters. Now, Trump has issued a 12-page rebuttal with footnotes, and some are commenting that, of course, it wasn't written by him because Trump doesn't do footnotes. But anyhow, he's claiming that the committee is wasting the time of the American people and are trying to distract from bigger domestic issues. The Wednesday hearing has been postponed to give the committee staff more time, but the committee hearings will be back on Thursday. What does all of this mean? And really, what impact are these hearings having now and may have for the future elections, including the midterms and the big 2024 election? We have a lot to talk about, and I have my all-star political panel here this morning to help us make sense of and to break down these hearings. My first guest is Richard Green. He is a political communication strategist and author of Words That Shook the World. Welcome back, Richard. And also joining us is Alice Stewart. She's a Republican political strategist and a CNN political commentator. Welcome back, Alice. And then Dr. Niambi Carter is here. She's a professor of public policy at the University of Maryland, and she's the author of American While Black. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, Areva.
Lots to break down. These 2 days of hearings, explosive, new deposition, first never revealed deposition testimony, and even new footage of the carnage and the vicious attack that we all watched with our very eyes on January 6th. Let's start with you, Alice. And what are your top takeaways from these hearings?
A couple things, Areva. First off, thanks for having me. Look, ever since Donald Trump came down the escalator, people have called him delusional and detached from reality. And oftentimes those are Democrats or disaffected Republicans. But now we've heard that from Trump insiders, senior staff, Bill Barr, close advisors saying that he was detached from reality. That's a rude awakening for not just Trump himself, but people that have bought in to the big lie. Look, it's not a secret. I'm Republican. I support the policies, but I've never bought into this. I thought it was wrong. I thought it was harmful to our democracy. And it's wrong for the sake of spreading this big lie. And look, there's a couple things. There's one thing that I think that this hearings will do. It will point a direct line, undisputable, not a dotted line, a direct line from the big lie and this false narrative to the tragic and awful and deadly insurrection on January 6th. But also the big grift. We're seeing the Trump team and advisors and supporters raise millions and millions of dollars off this bogus bullcrap legal defense fund for this defending fake allegations of election fraud. So I'm hopeful that what we get at the end of this, people's eyes are wide open to the fact that this was a lie from the very beginning. It was a lie through the insurrection. It continues to be a lie. And I truly hope someone's held accountable.
So, Richard, Alice says it shows that what many people have said all along, which is that Donald Trump is detached from reality. And I'm questioning some guy that raises $250 million. Is he really detached from reality, or is he just a great big con artist?
Well, that's exactly what Mike Bloomberg called him at the Democratic Convention supporting Hillary back in 2016. Yes, he's a grifter. He's a con man. Yesterday was the best day for Democrats in decades. I think yesterday was the beginning. It might take a really long time, but the beginning of the end of Trumpism. And I think that the campaign ads are going to be, are you on team normal or team crazy, with a wacky, crazy picture of a totally inebriated, of course he's drunk, he's always drunk, Rudy Giuliani, and a crazy picture of Donald Trump. And then on the other side, everyone else in the Republican Party, Bill Barr, Ivanka, Jared, Bill Stepien, all Brad Raffensperger. And at some point, people want to be in with the cool kids. And yesterday was the beginning of the messaging that it's no longer the cool kids that you've been hanging out with.
Yeah, Dr. Carter, you are a professor of public policy, political scientist for over 2 decades. Have you ever seen anything like this? The President of the United States rejecting the sound advice from his closest the advisors, his loyalists, people that are working for him. And these aren't rhinos, or these aren't people that are anti-Trump. These are people that support him. And even Bill Barr, in calling it bullshit, when he resigned, he still said very favorable things about the president. But have we ever seen a president reject every rational piece of advice given from an advisor, and then take advice from an outside, disgraced, drunk lawyer?
Well, good morning, Areva. And I think the short answer is no, right? Because you hire these people for a reason. These people are professionals. This is what they do for a living. Their job is to give you the sort of best advice and the best information that they have. And by all accounts, I mean, he had some of the best people at his disposal around elections and other kinds of things. The problem is Donald Trump doesn't like limits. And these people said there is an ethical limit to this. We've done everything we could do within the law to turn this election in your favor. You just didn't win, right? Our best efforts weren't good enough. So this has to end. And what Donald Trump likes are sycophants. He likes people who will sort of tell him what he wants to hear, not what he needs to hear. I mean, it's apparent, right? All of these people, from his pollsters to his campaign committee, to his attorney general, to the state attorney generals, many of whom were his own party in some of these disputed states like Georgia, for example, Arizona, told him there is no steal here, right? There's nothing to see here. And yet he persisted because Donald Trump is not used to being told no. He is not used to being told, hey, when you lose an election, what you do is move out of the way for the next person and you create a pathway for them to assume the office. You don't stamp your feet for 3 months and tell people stories that make you feel good and that are potentially dangerous, right? We saw what happened on January 6th. I got that text message saying that we were under curfew and couldn't leave our home after a certain hour, right? I don't know that many people understand that this wasn't just some isolated incident down the Capitol. It affected the over 600,000 people who live in the district and the surrounding areas. But all of that is to say, Donald Trump wasn't interested in anyone who was going to stand in his way. And I think that first day, Liz Cheney laid at that point really quickly that when he came to that rally on January 6th, he had no intention of ceding power on that day. And I think that was as damning as anything else that we're learning over these next few hearings.
I'm glad you brought up, Professor Carter, Liz Cheney. So Alice, Liz Cheney was heralded on Thursday as like the star. She's a University of Chicago law graduate, I believe, and many people didn't even know she was, such a skilled attorney and had gone to such a prestigious law school. So here she is getting all of this praise, even from Democrats, but we know her record is she voted like 93% of the time with Donald Trump. So she was not a anti-Trumper, but she has made the most, convincing and compelling case against Donald Trump that we've seen. But yet they say she's still in trouble in Wyoming, her state, as it relates to her own congressional race. What is the party thinking, your party, the Republican Party, thinking about Liz Cheney in this moment? Is she a traitor or is she saving democracy?
Well, rational Republicans praise her for standing up for the Constitution and what should have happened after the election, and that is a peaceful transition of power. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Look, I hate to see the fact that Donald Trump put a challenger up against her in Wyoming who is actually doing quite well. Shocked to read in the Post this morning that there are roughly 100 members of Congress that are running currently that buy into the big lie and continue this false narrative that Donald Trump won the election and Joe Biden lost the election. That's discouraging. I would like to think that people will continue to watch the hearings and see that there's nothing to see there in terms of the big lie is fraudulent and fake elections are fraudulent. But that will come out in due time. I do think, however, the political fallout of this is going to be that Democrats and those who didn't believe the big lie to begin with will continue to feel that way. And those that have ignorantly bought into the big lie will continue to have that mindset. But whether or not that has an impact in the midterm elections remains to be seen. I do think more people will be concerned with the economy and inflation and jobs and crime and the situation at the border as opposed to January 6th. But the bottom line is that Liz Cheney is right on in exposing the lies and deception that happened with this and making sure that we look back to the Constitution and install faith and integrity in the election process and make sure that those that are responsible are held accountable. And again, the most important thing that can take away from this, one of the attorneys from the first day of hearing said, when he heard about all of this nonsense going on, he said, I don't want to hear any more of the BS. I only want to hear 2 words moving forward: peaceful transfer. And that should be the message moving forward for any election.
Alice, let me ask you about these Republicans. And I saw that article you're referencing where it's literally over 100 Republicans in primaries are running on the big lie. And we even know the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, he's bought into it so much that his whole campaign is about how he's going to change the laws in Pennsylvania to make it easier for Republicans to throw out the electoral college, electors and votes for his state. Are these Republicans running on this because they see that this is a profitable, operation? Donald Trump raises $250 million. So are these 100 plus Republicans also using the big lie? Not because they believe in it, but because they know it can, solicit millions of dollars from their donors. They're just milking these poor donors.
It's a little bit more than the monetary benefits of buying into this. You don't want to get on the wrong side of Donald Trump. And if they continue to buy into the big lie and support the failed notion that Donald Trump actually won the election, then they're not on the receiving end of attacks from Donald Trump and mean statements and mean quotes. And, they have bought their way and supported their way away from having a primary challenger by Donald Trump. But look, this doesn't work in every district. This doesn't work in every state. I can tell you for a fact that in the state of Georgia, when Perdue and Loeffler ran on the false election lies, they lost. They lost for this very reason. So it might work in some areas, but I think there are a lot more rational Republicans out there than people give Republicans credit for. And they're not going to continue to buy into this. And hopefully after these hearings, more people will see the light.
So, Richard, Alice says that she thinks these hearings are going to have an impact on what she's calling rational Republicans. But she says that, there are going to be some people, Republicans out there that are just so entrenched in this lie. We know many of them watch Fox News, and Fox didn't cover the first hearing date last Thursday. And I guess Rupert Murdoch saw those 20 million plus viewers and said, let me get in on this rating bonanza. And lo and behold, on Monday, they're covering it, even though, they were critiquing it throughout. But they're now covering it. What does that say to those Fox viewers who are going to now be able to watch on their favorite show Republicans say things like bullshit, detached from reality? I mean, Team Normal versus Team, Giuliani. Any impact on these Fox viewers?
Yeah. I mean, if I had a wish to try to finally get these Fox viewers to understand real reality, it would be for what happened yesterday in Washington to be covered by Fox. So I got that wish. And I have to say, just in terms of Liz Cheney, I mean, we're in an alternate reality where I am bowing down to Liz Cheney and William Barr for being rational presidents, co-presidents of Team Normal. It's like, in what reality would I ever look up to those people? But I do believe that it is going to have an impact, because if Democrats are smart, we're going to leverage and amplify what happened yesterday. And it all goes back to an article that I wrote in December of 2016 in the Huffington Post. And the article was entitled, "Is Donald Trump Mentally Ill?" I think yesterday was Exhibit A, that it's not just Richard Green or every psychologist I've ever interviewed. It's most of the establishment Republican Party. Even most of his team thinks he is deranged and detached from reality and mentally ill. At some point, as I said before, it becomes less cool to hitch your wagon to someone who is demonstrably insane.
Yeah, let's hope so. The other issue that's come up, Dr. Carter, is criminal prosecution, not just around the incitement or conspiracy to incite a riot, to overthrow a valid election. Obviously, that's been on the table, but also now learning about these campaign contributions, that people were solicited to send money to a non-existent fund. And now there's lots of talks by the legal pundits about whether the case has been laid out by Liz Cheney and the others for the Justice Department and even state attorney generals across the country to file some kind of criminal charges. And we know whenever we talk about criminal charges against a former president, that gets really scary for Americans. So what's at stake if Donald Trump were actually indicted? We've seen him sued civilly by the Attorney General in New York, Tish James. We've seen individuals sue him, but we've not seen anyone file a criminal charge, an indictment, or a grand jury to indict Donald Trump. Does that make us nervous as a country?
I think so. I don't think anybody wants to see heads of state go to prison, but I think it's also important to remember there's still people at the end of the day. They have to abide by the law and follow the law like any of us. And I always say, when you're talking about politicians, because they do sometimes go to jail, not the president, but we've seen congressmen, we've seen mayors and others go to prison, governors. who's just another kind of executive. I don't know why presidents should be exempt. But one of the things that always gets people indicted is the money. And I always say, if you want to go to jail, the fastest way to do it is to raise money under nefarious purposes, right? And defraud people. I always say, follow the money. And I think that they're picking up on this money trail is to me, a big clue that they would like to see criminal charges. In fact, we've seen a little bit of sort of disagreement among the panelists because Benny Thompson said, well, we're not here to suggest criminal charges. And you have others saying, well, wait a minute, we haven't even decided this. So, I think we will see where this is going. But I think that money trail piece is really significant because you're raising hundreds of millions of dollars from normal Americans who are not rich, right, who have spent lots of money on this for this very particular purpose. And then we find out that that money has been used for everything but the thing that people said that they were donating money for. So, yes, we are queasy about the idea of imprisoning presidents and powerful people. But I don't think we should look at all of these other sort of January 6th participants who were really just regular people who showed up in DC, some of them more well-heeled than others, right? But they're all getting prison sentences, many in cases. They're getting criminal charges. So I don't think the people at the top should be exempt. And that includes Donald Trump. There's nothing special about a president in my mind, right? I know some people like the idea of the grand paternal figure who does all the right things and does the good things, but we have laws for a reason. So even when presidents violate them, they should be held accountable. Now, whether Merrick Garland has the stomach for it, I think is another question, and it's yet to be seen. But apparently, Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice are watching these hearings intently. So, we won't know until we know. But it does seem that this nation does not like the idea of presidents going to jail.
Areva, if I can please follow up on one thing she mentioned there is that legally, the case is being made whether or not there's a criminal charge to be made for this grift and convincing people to donate to some nefarious legal fund. I think just as damaging and harmful is the ethical shortcomings of this. I've worked on many campaigns. Whenever I would spend one dime, I would think there's an old couple, there's someone on limited income that believed in my candidate and believed in our cause, that gave the $20 they had because they believed they were giving it for the right reason. I was always extremely mindful of that. And to think we have a lot of people, as she said, they're not rich. They don't have a lot of expendable money, but they're giving money for something they think is a true and just cause. And to think that this money is being given millions and millions of dollars for a phony BS legal fund. And we have Kimberly Guilfoyle, the former president's soon-to-be daughter-in-law, getting $60,000 to speak at the Stop the Steal rally. It's disgusting. It's really disgusting. So whether or not they meet the legal criteria for criminal offense, it certainly does not pass the smell test. And it's really disgusting from an ethical standpoint.
And we also might have to think about mail fraud.
Mail fraud, all kinds of consumer protection laws that may have been broken, which allows states to step in even if the feds don't have the stomach. Yeah, Kimberly got 60 grand. I think they said the speech was about 2.5 minutes. Rich, you do a lot of public speaking. What do you say? Was that good value for the money that was spent for Kimberly? Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, I think she got paid for her dancing. Did you see her dancing before she went up to speak? Remember when her boyfriend was taking videos? So, by the way, I am not at all queasy about the thought of Donald Trump being in jail for the rest of his life. That actually gives me joy. And it gives my 93-year-old mother joy. She goes, why isn't he in jail yet? And I think there are a lot of us. But I have some bad news. I usually am very optimistic, and I know you appreciate that, Areva. I don't see a reality where any jury comes back in a criminal case unanimously to convict Donald Trump. What are the chances there's not going to be one or more cult members on that jury?
Yeah, and that may be true, Richard, but that's no reason not to move forward if there's probable cause. Lots of people are prosecuted who end up getting acquitted, but that doesn't stop prosecutors from doing their job. I do wonder, though, like from your perspective, Richard, what's next? What do you want to see next? We're supposed to have hearings on Wednesday. They've been postponed to Thursday. We know there's several more days. What else do you think this committee needs to present to just really nail the coffin shut, to end any notion that there's election fraud, that somehow the election was stolen from Donald Trump, or that Donald Trump is deserving to ever step foot in any government office in this country?
Yeah, I'd like to see Bill step in after he, spend some time with his new baby, come and do a whole day with him live, right? We need to reinforce and reinforce and reinforce what happened yesterday and get that messaging out there. And I think the only thing that matters is the midterms. Are we going to have the people who believe in the big lie running states and the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives or not? And I think the committee has to create that nexus.
So there's a poll out, Alice, that says that if Trump were to run today, he would lose. And these are more considered more Republican or right-leaning pollsters who have done these polls. Do you think that's true?
I truly believe that he will do well in a Republican primary, but he would never win in a general election. Look, he's still the titular head of the Republican Party. Many people will support him regardless, but we have to think about how we're going to play in the general election in November of 2024. We have to look at it from that standpoint. So I would like to think that there's going to be some rational Republicans, as I call them, come forth and come to the surface, and people realize, like they did here in my state of Virginia with Glenn Youngkin, who supported the policies of the previous administration, but did it in a way that was respectable and working across the aisle and bringing in suburban voters and the disaffected voters that we lost under the Trump administration. That is the playbook for 2020. And you have to look at this from the standpoint, when Donald Trump came into office, since that time, Republicans lost the House and the Senate and the White House. I'm not a World Series coach, but I can tell you that's not a winning formula. It's not a winning playbook. So you have to go back to the roots of the party and focus on policies, focus on a more kinder, gentler type of leadership, because that's clearly what the voters want. So look, we have to change course. There needs to be a course correction. I truly believe we'll win certainly the House and possibly the Senate in the midterm elections. And with the wind at backs of Republicans, that's a good sign for 2024.
Wait a minute. Richard is shaking his head like, hell no. Richard, Alice is screaming.
Yeah, well, it will not be the first time Alice and I disagree. I think what happened yesterday, Alice, I really do think this debunking of the big lie, which is the foundation, the electoral foundation of your party today, whether you like it or not, I think that's going to have an impact.
I know this is the topic of the day is the hearings, but when we head into November, the impact will be the economic issues. It will be inflation, it will be gas prices, it will be grocery, it will be crime, it will be immigration. That's going to be the impact. And that's going to motivate voters. While I think January 6th is important, don't get me wrong, we need to have this investigation. But when the rubber meets the road and voters go to the polls, it's going to be the economic issues that shape them.
Well, let me say this. Let me jump in. Alice, if you say it's going to be the economic issues, Joe Biden has created more jobs than any president ever in recent history, maybe ever, definitely more than Donald Trump. So if it's going to be the economic issues, why don't we win on that? Because more Americans are employed. Yes, there are high gas prices and food is higher and some other items are higher. But when you look economically, Joe Biden is the guy.
And you have to look at
trust Republicans when, we saw what the Republicans did when Donald Trump was in control. Why do you think voters are going to give them another shot?
Well, you also have to look at the overall barometer of the economy. The labor participation rate is down. GDP is at a historic level. And the pocketbook issues are motivators for voters. And you can cast off gas prices as a one-off, but it hits people where it hurts, and gas and groceries and the everyday supplies they need for their homes. Those are what cause people to lose interest in the current leadership, and that's going to be an issue. Again, crime is something that people are concerned with, as well as what's going on with in terms of handling of foreign policy. So look, again, January 6th is important. We need to find these answers, but that people are going to be looking forward and not backwards. We're not going to relitigate 2020. We're not going to relitigate January 6th. But what they do want to do is make sure that their pocketbook issues are protected moving forward.
Alice, you say we're not going to relitigate it, and Republicans relitigate it every day with those bogus solicitations to their voters. Every day they're saying the big lie. They are the ones that are relitigating it. Donald Trump at every rally is still talking about the election that was stolen from him. So that's a little disingenuous, I think, to say that Democrats are relitigating it when Donald Trump is keeping the big lie alive because it's how he makes money. But I'm going to run out of time. I want to ask you this, Dr. Carter. Issue of race. So Alice just said that Republicans lost everything under Donald Trump. They lost the House, they lost the Senate, they lost the White House. So logically, you would think Donald Trump would be the last person that they would want to support because they lost under him. So I'm just wondering, is something else motivating these base voters? Because obviously it's not logic, according to Alice, and what role does race? Because a lot of these hearings, what has been revealed too, is the role that white supremacists played in organizing this insurrection, and that our president was complicit in some ways working with these white supremacists, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. That's a big element in these hearings that I think we need to focus on as well.
Well, look, I definitely think race is always at play in American politics. And certainly Donald Trump was very comfortable playing footsies with racists, if not racialists, right? Like Stephen Millers of the world, who have some really, I think, off-kilter views about race and minoritized individuals in this country. And listen, I don't think that every person who supports Republicans or every person who supported Donald Trump is a racist, but it is no doubt that he courted a specific type of white male voter, and particularly those who view themselves as aggrieved, those who view themselves as being pushed out, those who view themselves as being replaced, right? The great replacement theory has been talked about a lot here, right? People who are anxious about the changing complexion of America, about the fact that we have street signs that might have Mandarin on them, or that we have ATMs that come in multiple languages, right? They lament the loss of an America where they were sovereign and superior, right? And so there's no doubt that those folks were courted. I think the other part of this is, I don't actually think that Alice is wrong in terms of thinking about how people forecast who to support in an election. They just want it to stop. And if the other guys are promising a solution to problems that seem to crop up under the other guy, then yeah, it makes sense to support the person who says they're going to fix it. But I also think we have to remember what's at stake for those very same Black and brown voters who showed up in 2020 if Republicans take the Senate and the House again, right? We've gotten nothing on voting rights already with a Democratic president and Democratic majority in the House, and then a split Senate. We've got nothing, right, that looked like voter protection. And these very same people are saying, well, we're going to win again. And those very same people want to prevent people that look like me and you from voting in robust numbers in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Arizona, in Wisconsin. So we have to be very careful that to remember that sort of racial pendulum swings both ways. So people are making all kinds of calculations about what a Republican dominated government will mean for them. It's already not voted well under Democrats. So I think the idea that, communities of color, people of color will do better with a Republican, a solidly Republican government or national government is perhaps an even scarier proposition. This is what we were talking about with Pennsylvania last time, that the idea that Republicans win again is going to make life better for people of color. I just don't think that holds for many of those communities. Of course, some segments, yes.
And Richard, last question for you. So Alice says, and Dr. Carter agrees with her in part, that people are going to be voting their pocketbook and pocketbook issues, and they're going to forget about these explosive hearings and all of this testimony, the Bill Barr bullshit comment, and Ivanka
You
Trump.
love saying that, don't you?
I love it. Because when has an attorney general attacked their president in that way? Yes, I love it.
And we've all been
and
given
I don't.
permission to use that word now. It's now cool. You can do it. No one's going to yell at you or put soap in your mouth.
Like you saying you're bowing down to Liz Cheney, I'm not going to go that far. I'm not bowing down to Bill Barr, but I am giving him like a high five for at least being honest ever, because throughout his term as Attorney General, he was absolutely positively horrible. So
I
let's be
agree.
clear about that. But he did make some honest statements through that deposition. But what are people going to be thinking about when they go to the polls in November, Richard?
So listen, we've talked about this a lot. Absolutely. I mean, it's the economy stupid, right? People are going to vote for that. But I have a question for Alice. The Republicans didn't even have a platform in the last presidential election. Mitch McConnell refuses to talk about what he's going to do if he takes over the majority leader position again. You've got Rick Scott saying his solution is to raise taxes on poor people. The economists around the world don't know what to do to fight inflation or high gas prices. What is your party going to do other than say they're screwing it up, put us back in? And also, Alice, I think you're underestimating the role of Roe v. Wade in terms of turning out voters who would not otherwise vote.
All right, Alice, what's your party going to do? Mitch McConnell says, I'm not telling you my platform. It's the same platform we've always had.
The platform is important, but you also need the right person to deliver and promise that they will deliver that platform. Look, Republicans will continue to be about limited government, fiscal responsibility. Now the issue fighting crime, the crisis at the border, foreign policy, reducing taxes, and also the issue of parental involvement in education. And I'm really glad you brought up Roe v. Wade. Expect that decision possibly to come down tomorrow. But I believe this is going to be a big motivator for all voters. Those that are pro-life are going to re-engage, because this is an issue that has been top of mind for me. It was a big reason why I was able to support Donald Trump, because of his commitment to, quote, Scalia-like justices. But this issue will motivate people that are pro-life. It will also motivate people that are pro-choice. And you look at the latest numbers from CNN poll in terms of the motivation and the enthusiasm of registered voters. Republicans have a 3-point advantage of motivated electorate heading into the midterm elections, and I expect that to continue. So, look, it's going to bring out people on both sides, but right now we're seeing a greater enthusiasm behind Republicans than Democrats. So that's going to be helpful for Republican side.
Yeah, I got to leave it there. But Alice, I'm really stunned by what you just said the platform is. That doesn't, Mitch McConnell has never said that that's the platform of Republicans. We don't know what the Republican platform is. And what you said, we could look back 10 years, 20 years. That used to be what majority of Republicans believed in. But I'm not so sure about, today's Republicans and this whole notion that, Mitch McConnell's so arrogant, he feels like he doesn't even owe it to the American people to tell us what the Republicans believe in, other than thwarting and obstructing everything that the Democrats try to do. But interesting conversation. Have to have you all back. Thank you so much for kicking off this panel. We're going to be watching Thursday, the next hearing. All of you, take some great notes. Going to have you back to continue this conversation. Richard, we've got to find out from you about the messaging. Are the Dems getting it right? I know you think they had a fantastic day on Monday, which I'm glad to hear, and we'll see if they continue to hit the ball out the park. But thank you again, Dr. Carter, Alice, and Richard. Always a pleasure to see all of you.
Thanks.
All right. Alice brought up a really great point. All the panelists brought up this point about these Republicans who are running for office, and a part of their platform is that they are going to make laws in their state that give their Republican-controlled legislators and governors control over the election results. So if they don't like who wins the election in their state, they're going to simply undo it and, cause the person who they support, i.e. the Republican, to win the election, including the presidential election. Dr. Alex Kazar, professor at Harvard Kennedy School of Government and author of Why Do We Still Have the Electoral College? and Alex Tasanovich, he's the Director of Campaign Finance and Electoral Reform at the Center for American Progress, are here to help us understand how dangerous these Republicans are to our democracy. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Kazar and Alex. All right, big article out, and I think it's Wash Post this morning. It says these Republicans who are running for office aren't just running to win their seats, they're running so that they can ensure that they control election results. How dangerous is this, Dr. Kazar?
It's very dangerous. It's basically part of a strategy designed to figure out other ways to wield power than winning elections and getting the most votes. It's basically, calling upon some, particularly with respect to presidential elections, some poorly written and vaguely worded laws and constitutional provisions in order to really to circumvent the people's will. I mean, that's what it's about. It's that simple. It's how can we circumvent an election loss at the polls? That's about as dangerous as a threat to democracy can be.
And Alex, I guess the big question is, can they do it?
Well, it's a really, I think, a deep concern. And not only should we be concerned that there are candidates who are basically basing their campaigns on the idea that the last election was stolen and saying things that are forward-looking, like they wouldn't let that happen again. In some cases, saying that they may not be willing to certify an election. And the implication being that they are not going to trust election results if their candidates, if their chosen candidates don't win. But we're seeing this at the candidate level. We're also seeing it among a very large segment of Republicans, unfortunately, that they believe that the last election was stolen. And so we have to be concerned that now there will be people at all of the levels of the election system, from poll workers to people who are in election administration at higher levels, to then secretaries of state and governors who do not believe in democratic election outcomes. And that's a very real concern.
So, Dr. Kazar, we saw in that Pennsylvania Senate race, so Dr. Oz, there were grumblings about election fraud and not respecting the vote when it was thought that he was going to lose. But then when they win, all of a sudden, the results are perfectly fine and they're ready to embrace the results. So how is that going to work? If their candidates are losing, it's fraud. But if the Republican candidate is winning, the fraud allegations go away. My mind is, it's a mind-boggling proposition leading into November.
It is, but the way you stated is absolutely accurate. It's that there's this conviction that a good electoral system will lead to my victory, and if I do not win, then that means that by definition that means that there's fraud or something wrong with the electoral system. I mean, we saw that in a slightly submerged way, even in the results of the 2020 election, where there were claims of fraud. But in many places, including in a lot of areas in Pennsylvania, President Trump ran way behind or well behind other Republican candidates further down, so that somehow the stealing of the election was only happening in certain races. I think what one has to underscore here is that what this is doing is undermining or sabotaging faith in the electoral system. And God knows our electoral institutions have problems, our management of elections have problems, although actually I think our election management has gotten much better in recent decades. But it is undermining faith in elections. And, not to be too dramatic about it, but that the significance of that is that if you can't change regimes or preserve a regime or determine who should be in power through an election, what do you have left? What you have left is force. And that's the only real alternative. and that's not desirable and not a democracy.
So, Alex, how do we stop this? I mean, it's not as if this is happening clandestinely or, behind closed doors or in secret. They are, as you said, many of these candidates, first of all, over 100 Republican candidates are still running on the big lie. They are embracing it and running on it. And despite the fact that we saw Trump had some losses in states like Georgia, he's having a good run at it. These candidates that are embracing the good lie are winning their primaries, and they're in heavily Republican districts, so they're expected to win in the general election too. And they're making it very clear, as Dr. Kazar said, that they're going to change the laws. They're going to, appoint themselves or someone that looks like them, give them full authority. What can we do to stop this?
Well, it's a very difficult problem. It's become the beliefs now that that election results can't be trusted is unfortunately become rather widespread, particularly on the right. And so we need to not support folks who don't believe in the integrity of elections and who are willing to lie to the American people about what happened in the last election. And we also need to do what we can to push back on those legislative efforts and to try and enact new protections for elections where we can. I think, it's worth pointing out that there have been some Republicans who have pushed back on the big lie and who are standing up for the idea that democracy is important and that a lot of these things that are being said about our system are untrue. That's incredibly important. But one thing I think that we can do in Congress is to support an effort to reform the Electoral Count Act. This is just one piece of this problem, but there is a bipartisan working group in the Senate that seems to be doing serious work to try and fix a part of our presidential election process that fed into and supported the January 6th insurrection by allowing people to believe that they could overturn the state results for the presidency.
So what if the law is passed, what will it do?
A reform to the Electoral Count Act would make clear that in a situation like we had last time, the vice president cannot unilaterally overturn state election results. It would also do things like establish a judicial process where if there are disputes about which results are valid at the state level in the Electoral College, the judicial process would resolve those disputes according to the existing law and not allow politicians who in some cases are just trying to do whatever they can to support their chosen candidates to override the will of the people in these elections. So it's a very important reform, and all we really need, I think, there, besides to strengthen the bipartisanship of support for that reform, is a greater sense of urgency. That this has to happen, not just a comprehensive reform, but it has to happen soon.
Can I add to that a bit? I mean, there are a number of different proposals about this reform, but another one is that right now the procedure in Congress permits a representative of any one state to challenge the electoral votes coming from a state, and I think that there's a significant interest in significantly raising that threshold. And I think we also, it's worth bearing in mind without going into the arcane history about which I've written too much, but the Electoral Count Act is, in some sense, a legacy of the problems over race in the wake of the Civil War, leading to an electoral crisis in 1876. And the Electoral Count Act was designed to avoid such crises, but I assign the Electoral Count Act to my students in a course that I teach about January 6th, and no one has yet understood what it says.
But you are a proponent, Professor, of eliminating the Electoral College. Is that correct?
I am. I think that
is now the time, given what we're seeing, which is state elected officials and even congressional members of our, U.S. House of Representatives talking about manipulating electors in a way that is basically undermining the Electoral College Act, which I would probably be like most of your students who don't quite understand it. But is this now what we're witnessing? Is this like the perfect piece of evidence in favor of eliminating the Electoral College?
Well, I think there's been a lot of evidence around for a long time, and and we have to remember that Congress came very, very close to eliminating the Electoral College in 1969-70, really within a whisker. So it's not like this is some newfangled idea. But I think that what the 2020 election demonstrated is that our way of electing presidents, well, for one thing, it's not very democratic in terms of not all votes count equally, but that the basic structure, the plumbing of the system, is so subject to abuse and manipulation that it really could make electoral outcomes in doubt. And the flip side of that is the old-fashioned notion that electoral processes should be transparent and kind of clear, and the way they work should be clear to the voters. There's some simple principle like whoever gets the most votes wins. Old-fashioned as that notion may be, but I think that that thus is a case for turning to replacing the Electoral College with the national popular vote. That said, is this the moment? Yes, I think it is, but the Republican Party, or most of it, seems quite convinced that the Electoral College benefits them, and unless something changes, I think they will strongly oppose any efforts at reform.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that, Alex. So you said there's this bipartisan group working on reforms. Where does that bill go once it gets to the Senate? Knowing what we know about the Senate, we know how obstructionist they have been with regards to any kind of reform of our voting laws. So is there any real hope that a bill like that would get through the Senate, particularly since, as a professor said, Republicans believe the Electoral College and all of its flaws benefit them?
I think there is hope, and partly because this bill is, or the effort rather, it's still, there still isn't bill text, but this conversation is happening in the Senate, and it is involving a significant number of both moderate and mainstream Senate Republicans. And so I do think that there seems to be enough support that it could even overcome the filibuster, in which case there is a pretty good chance that it could then pass the House. But it really is partly a matter of timing. We have an election season coming up. It's very difficult for Congress to act once we get closer to that election. So it's a question of whether the people involved in this effort have enough of a sense of urgency. And I hope what we're seeing with these hearings will sort of add to that urgency.
Yeah, and Professor, I asked Professor Carter this in an earlier segment about the possibility of criminal charges being filed against Donald Trump. Help us understand from a political and historical standpoint how significant that might be. We've never seen a president charged criminally. And Richard Green, our political strategist, says he doesn't think a jury would convict him. And, we know that's not the standard that's used in criminal prosecution. But it just feels like the weight of that is so great that Merrick Garland, despite pressure, is probably not willing to do that.
Well, that's certainly the way it looks. Although, I think I certainly feel like I'd be reading tea leaves in terms of trying to predict what Merrick Garland is going to do. Yeah, it would be entirely unprecedented. We have had, we had Watergate, we had Nixon who violated the laws, but that was dealt with by impeachment, which is normal, which in some sense is quotes the normal process. And there were presidents where a lot of corruption swirled around them, like Warren Harding in the 1920s. On the one hand, I guess my own view about this is that on the one hand, I think that it would be shocking for the American people, and there would be resistance and almost a kind of emotional or psychological resistance to putting a president on trial and convicting him and sending him to jail. On the other hand, it's widely known that this guy did a whole lot of stuff that was likely illegal. and certainly unethical. And to just say, well, he can get away with it because he was president of the United States doesn't seem like a great way to run a country either.
No, you're absolutely right. And so many people are frustrated, as to why, like how much evidence, must we mount and display before this guy does face some kind of, consequences that everyday people would clearly face. The $250 million raised on these false, solicitations, money taken from people going to non-existent funds. I mean, I just can't imagine that anyone else does that and walks away from it.
Right, right. I mean, if I misutilized $2,000 in a research fund, I would get into serious trouble. All right.
Yeah, no, everyone else would. Alex, Steve Bannon issued kind of a threat to the Justice Department and said, look, Merrick Garland, if you touch Donald Trump when we win in November, when the Republicans take over the House, which he's confident they will, he said they're going to impeach him. Is that a threat that Merrick Garland should take seriously?
Well, like others, I don't know what Merrick Garland is going to do, but I think he's not going to listen to Steve Bannon. To his credit, it's a difficult issue, prosecuting a president. But as Dr. Kesar said, there's clear evidence here of a number of different types of illegality. And as to the $250 million you mentioned, this is an area where a fraud can be difficult to prove. We don't know if there'll be a fraud prosecution. But one of the difficult elements is showing that the person who lied knew at the time that they were telling a lie. And on this, I don't think the hearings really leaves any room for doubt. Everybody around the president, all the people who you would think he would ask this question, his campaign manager, the attorney general, who's the top lawyer for the government, the top lawyers at the White House counsel's office, they all said the same thing to the president. Listen, Mr. President, these things you're saying about the election, they're just not true. We've investigated them. There's no evidence for fraud. So I think on that, we now have a much clearer picture that the president had every reason to know that the things he was saying publicly were false.
Yeah, not to mention the 60 plus lawsuits that were filed and lost, some on procedural grounds because he just had probably the worst lawyers ever in the history of America, but also many on the merits. Some of them did get reviewed by judges who were appointed by Donald Trump. So not only is this, was he told by his loyalists, by his insiders, by his advisors, he was told by many of the judges that he appointed, people who, were not willing to back the big lie. It's going to be so interesting. Dr. Kesar, last question for you. What are you expecting and what are you hoping to see on Thursday and proceeding as we continue to watch these hearings that are really just captivating the nation?
What I expect to see, and I'm sort of, in some sense, Liz Cheney in the first day gave us the table of contents of the book, and I expect to see that playing out. And what I expect to see is, an ongoing effort to tell the narrative. And I think that part of what they're doing, which is very important, is that. For one thing, lots of people haven't been paying attention, but from people who are been casually paying attention over the last year and a half, one piece of evidence drips out, another one 2 weeks later, another one a month later, and now they're assembling it and they're giving it to you, as a narrative and in sequence. And so far, each such piece of the narrative, as they assemble it, has clarified the story and reminded us of the connections between the different parts of the story, in addition to making some legal points along the way. And I expect that they're going to continue doing that. And I think that what they're doing is extremely valuable, both for present politics, et cetera, but also, and here I speak as a historian, to establish a historical record. We're going to need to have that.
Yeah. Absolutely great point to end on, a historical record. Yeah, can't imagine what students 20 years from now will be thinking as they're reading and watching the videotape from these hearings. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Professor Kesar. Always a pleasure to see you. We will be watching these hearings, and we'll have more conversations about them. So watch this space.
Thank you,
Thank
Areva.
all of my guests
Thank you.
this morning for joining me. Such an important topic. You cannot escape what's happening in our country. And if you are voting, if you're going to the polls, and hopefully you all are, because we all need to vote, you need to have this information. You need to have it as you are selecting the candidates that you're going to put in office, because your vote matters and who we put in office matters. Just some words to live by before I get out. When people show you who they are, believe them. We've heard that famous quote from Maya Angelou, quoted over and over again, reiterated, stated over and over again. Trump keeps showing us who he is. He keeps showing us over and over and over again. And now the only question is, what will it take for that portion of Americans who refuse to believe it? What is it going to take for them to believe that Trump is exactly who he keeps showing himself to be? Stay with us. We're going to continue this conversation. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.